Welcome to Feeling Seen, the podcast about the movies that make us feel seen. We're about halfway through June as this episode drops, and while it's pretty much always Pride Month here on Feeling Seen, this week we have something special for you in that department. My guest is Adam Goldman, a writer who's responsible for a whole slew of independent queer media. He self-produced a successful web series called The Outs back in the 2010s, and then another called Whatever This Is that followed not too long after. Then that led to a narrative fiction podcast called Hot White Heist, now in its second season on Audible. Adam has brought an icon from an iconic film, a character that for many may have been their first exposure to what it meant to be a, quote, proud homosexual. That character? Mr. Green from the 1985 movie Clue, a classic and a personal favorite as played by Michael McKean. I first met Adam many years ago when, as a friend of my roommate at the time, he stayed on our couch in our San Francisco apartment. So in addition to an excellent conversation, this episode doubles as a little reunion.
So Adam Goldman, what else do the people need to know about you before we get started in this wonderful reconnecting of worlds?
That's it. That was such a kind introduction. I'd say I'm a professional homosexual. That's what I do. Everything I do seems to sort of orbit, in that sort of galaxy
what a good gig.
Of stuff. Yeah, it's fun. It's nice work if you can get it, which I sometimes can, knock on wood. So, but the second season of Hot White Heist came out a few months ago, and we're in the process of adapting that for television at the moment, which hopefully all goes well. And people can check out the first season of that is on all podcast platforms, Hot White Heist, and then season 2 is currently just on Audible.
Well, and speaking of like community forming around these things, and like in my thesis over here of like seeing ourselves in entertainment, like a fan of The Outs was Alan Cumming, and through his enjoyment of the show, he posted it, and I'm assuming that drew at least a few more eyeballs to it, and then you two became creative collaborators, and now he's also involved in Hot White Heist.
Yeah. So Alan tweeted about The Outs and said he was obsessed with it, and I obviously freaked out because the thing about Alan is that whoever you are, he has this incredible career of, the younger people are really into Spy Kids, which I was a little after my time, but X-Men 2, Romeo and Michelle, GoldenEye, Eyes Wide Shut. So you talk to him and everybody has something different running through their heads, and we struck up a friendship, and he's in The Outs and he's in Whatever This Is, and I wrote for him when he hosted the Tonys. He tagged me in for that, which was amazing. And he's just a friend and like a dear collaborator now, and we have really similar sensibilities. And so when I had this unbelievably stupid idea for Hot White Heist, which came out of a tweet about a sperm bank heist, which the joke was I would give my right arm for a queer heist movie, and no, they're not stealing sperm. And then I thought about it for 1 second, and I thought, oh no, I have to write it. Because it's the term sperm bank heist, people go, I know what that is, I get it.
Totally.
And so I sent it to Alan, and it sort of snowballed from there, and he directed the first season and co-directed the second season, and through him and through Audible and through our partnership with Broadway Video, Lauren Michaels' company, we got this incredible all-queer cast for the first season. Really, it's like Margaret Cho, Ian McKellen, Jane Lynch, Bowen Yang is at the center of the show. A bunch of Drag Race beloved, Bianca Del Rio, Evie Oddly, Trixie, Katya. It's like every wonderful queer person who we could get our hands on is in it, and it was a real treat. And that all came out of The Outs, and that's why sort of my philosophy when people ask is like, just make the thing. If you have an idea, if you can, just make the thing, because you never know where it will lead 3 things down the line. And even though that's hard to get that momentum started, do it. Just do the thing. Yeah.
And now the character that when I emailed you, you came back with a fantastic answer from one of my favorite movies of all time. So tell us what character and what movie you have brought to the Feeling Seen conversation today.
Got that email. I was so quick draw McGraw. It was like, what, do you have an idea? Is there anyone? And Mr. Green from Clue. It was like instantaneous. It was Mr. Green from Clue, played by Michael McKean, and Clue 1985, I believe. And, for a lot of people, I think Clue is really baby's first farce.
Yeah, I absolutely would agree.
Is this the right address to meet Mr. Body?
Oh, you must be Mr. Green.
Yeah.
Sit! No, not you, sir.
And it's so much fun and so dumb, and I say that with all the affection, I specialize in stupid shit. Can I swear?
Yes,
Is that
absolutely. Yeah, free reign.
But like, it's so dumb, and being dumb effectively is really hard.
It is.
Carrying off a stupid joke is really hard. In that movie, we'll talk about it. It's a deep rabbit hole with me and Clue and Mr. Green that gets into the multiverse and artistic intent and all of this crazy stuff. But Mr. Green, an almost unique example in media, to my mind, of the gay dipshit.
Oh, fabulous.
And that is how I identify strongly. And so, he's one of the characters in the movie, and he comes out. He says, I'm a homosexual. And then he immediately says, I feel no personal guilt or shame around this.
Yeah.
Which, again, a movie that came out in 1985 that takes place in the 50s during McCarthyism, pretty much the only example of that I can think of. And so even before I knew what that movie was about, before I knew what it meant to come out as a homosexual, something about that character, I thought, that's kind of me, and I like that, and I want to see more of that.
So you recognize immediately, I don't know how old you were when you saw this, but you recognize immediately that, no, that statement makes sense to me. I am a homosexual as well, and I... despite perhaps what the world would have me believe, I do not feel guilt or shame around this.
I don't know. No, at the time, I was 8.
Sure.
I watched it with a friend who obviously also turned out to be gay. And
you were watching Clue.
There was something about the vibe of that movie, or the tone of the comedy, that rubbed off on me. And, it's one of these things like The Birdcage, where you look back at Clue, which, we can talk about the history of it, but it was a flop in cinemas. But you look back at it now and you go, it's not an accident that people love it.
Yeah.
And it's not an accident because the cast is outrageous.
Outrageous. I have watched this movie so many times over the years, but then putting it on again to rewatch for this, a complete joy. It was like, how is it every time I put Clue on, I've forgotten that every goddamn person is an oh my god.
Absolutely. And it's like Madeline Kahn and Christopher Lloyd and Tim Curry and just down the line. And then I think of that in terms of The Birdcage too, because The Birdcage, everybody loves it.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, what a funny, weird little movie. And you go, no, it's Mike Nichols. It's written by Elaine May. It's Nathan Lane and Robin Williams, and down and down.
Yeah. Gene Hackman and Diane Weiss and Christine Baranski. Just like Murderer's Row.
And the director of photography who did Interstellar and has won a handful of Oscars. So you go, it's not an accident. When something hits like this, it's because it takes talented people coming together and making it. And so I've watched Clue since then 200 times. And I don't know, was Mr. Green, do you remember that? What was your experience of the movie, and did that ever stick out to you as something that stuck?
Mr. Green, I was actually thinking about this when I was watching it. I was like, what did I think the first time I saw Mr. Green? And my grandparents owned a series of beauty schools in the Portland area in Oregon. And they, the folks teaching and studying at the beauty school was a bag of mixed nuts, And one of their very best friends was a man named Jerry Calleonen, and his drag name was Snickers LaBar. And
beautiful. Oh my God.
Snickers was that's the first drag queen I ever saw, because I saw Jerry over at the house. And Jerry was and I remember meeting Mr. Green in this movie, and I remember thinking of Jerry when I saw him. Oh, I know guys like him. There are a couple characters that I remember from earlier in my life as I've gotten older where it's like, oh, wow, they were different. And I knew they were different when I saw them. And it didn't mean something to me at the time that they were not sorry for who they were. But now I look at that and I'm like, holy shit, these people weren't sorry for who they were. And these movies are fucking old now. And like you said, made in the 80s and set in 1956. It's
crazy, which is, there's a few things, it's a perspective. It's a question of perspective. And it's subtle. But in Clue, the movie is on Mr. Green's side.
I believe, yes.
And so he comes out, and the joke, if anything, is that everybody else in the room is squicked out by him. But the movie wants you to laugh at them.
Yeah.
And more to the point, and I think this has, my dream is to talk to Michael McKean about this. The joke is never at his expense. You can imagine a version of that character that would really offend now and that would not age well, where he was like mincing and effeminate. And he was, Christopher Lloyd is always looking down Yvette's
always into her cleavage,
her breasts. Yes. And there is you can go, well, it would have been really easy to make that joke equivalent with Mr. Green checking out someone's ass or grabbing someone's crotch or something like that. And the movie absolutely refuses to do it.
Well, I'm going to start while it's still hot.
Oh, now shouldn't we wait for the other guests?
I will keep something warm for you.
What did you have in mind, dear?
And I think that is just, I don't want this to fall into he happens to be gay territory because that's sort of, I don't buy that. I don't believe that. But like, it is not a part of his plot. And to the extent that it is, it's that he doesn't care about it and he's not ashamed of it. The only problem is that it's McCarthyism and he will lose his government job if it comes out. And so, to the same extent, I think about Tu Wong Fu.
Yes.
Which is a movie that has some funky gender stuff going on under the hood that hasn't aged particularly well, but it is the perspective of the movie that it is on their side, that the rest of the world is ridiculous. And then, so this is all further complicated. I mean, we should just start with the basics. Clue, I think the first board game to film adaptation that exists.
I was watching this with a friend and I was like, God, video game or this kind of thing, like this kind of IP adaptation now becomes like a horror movie or like a kids movie in 3D animation. I was like, this is a movie with generationally important comedic actors doing an incredible farce. This movie took it fucking seriously.
Took it very seriously, and they sat down and they had at some point they had a conversation where they said, okay, so the game Clue, what do you know about the game Clue? There's the weapons, and it's in the house, although I think it was originally set in a hotel, the first version of the game. And I'll just sidebar and say, one of my favorite moments in the movie is when the weapons show up. And the score really leans, and so you're supposed to be sitting with your friend going, that's the lead pipe. That's just like in the game.
Open them.
Why not? I enjoy getting presents from strange men. A candlestick. What's this for?
But so they said that, and they said the other thing about Clue is whodunit changes every time you play.
Yeah.
And how do we do that for an audience? And they took this very big, frankly, kind of avant-garde swing in theaters where they shot 4 different endings and they jettisoned one of them. But so when you went to see it, you would not know which ending you were going to get. It was listed in the newspaper.
That's incredible.
And they thought that people would go to see the movie multiple times, but it turned out that it made people too freaked out that they were going to miss something and nobody saw it anyway. And I'm referring here largely to this wonderful oral history of the movie by Maureen Lenker at Entertainment Weekly. So they did that. And then when the movie came to VHS, they decided the way to do it was to line up all of the endings of the movie.
Yes, the home video release.
Yes, which is where we all saw it. And when I think this gets into this this concept that I've talked about a lot with friends, which is what we talk about when we talk about Clue.
That could be a podcast on the Maximum Fun Network. That could be a standalone
Sign me
show.
Up. And so because most of us are talking about the VHS release, so most of us saw this version of it where they line up all 3 endings.
Yeah,
they
you
do
get
one ending.
Well, that's what could have happened, and then here's what, and then here's what really happened.
Here's what really happened. This is important because in the 3rd and final ending, according to the VHS release, the last line of the movie, the ending revolves around Mr. Green not actually being gay.
Yeah.
He's an FBI plant, and the last line of the movie is he kind of winks at the camera and says, "I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife."
Yep.
Are you a cop?
No, I'm a plant.
A plant? I thought men like you were usually called a fruit.
Very funny. FBI. That phone call from J. Edgar Hoover was for me. I told you I didn't do it. All right, who done it?
You did. That one lady right here. Right.
They all did it. But if you want to know who killed Mr. Body, I did. In the hall. With the revolver. Okay, Chief, take him away. I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife.
And so in this way, Mr. Green is Schrodinger's fag because he is both gay and not gay, depending on. And so this presents all these questions of who decided to line up the endings that way, who decided that the canon ending was the one that it was. And in that oral history, Jonathan Lynn, the director, says it was him, that he went in and he lined them up that way. But elsewhere in the oral history, Michael McKean says, I improv that line.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't in the script.
Interesting.
And there's some debate about that between him and Jonathan Lynn, and there's no way to get to the bottom of it now. So this question is really like, what is the intent of the movie? Now, I don't think this movie intends to push a queerness agenda on us. I don't think that is the heart, but it is the end of the movie, and it obviously spoke to me. I can just speak for myself, and I know other people, other gay dipshits who saw Mr. Green and thought this is me. This says something about who I am. And so the question of whether you delete Mr. Green's queerness from the movie in the last 5 seconds becomes kind of important.
Yeah.
And for me, and I was just debating this with a friend who wrote a whole wonderful essay about this called Green's Clues. That sort of analyzes Mr. Green's queerness and the way that it's presented in the movie. For me, and this is very far up my ass, but what is podcasting if not autoproctology?
Absolutely.
The question for me is, the movie is asking me, do queer people exist?
Okay.
And I, in my entire career, posit that yes, we do.
Well, and I think that is an interesting thing about Clue, which is that this movie is, in any other case where, say, Mr. Green is, that his secret is not that he's a homosexual and that he will be expunged from his government work if he's found out, say it's something else, and he is absolutely straight-coded and that's not even, this movie is already queer-coded through Eileen Brennan, Madeline Kahn, and Leslie Ann Warren giving the best Susan Sarandon performance she could possibly muster.
Yes.
Mrs. White, you've been paying our friend the blackmailer ever since your husband died under, shall we say, mysterious circumstances.
Why is that funny?
I see. That's why he was lying on his back in his coffin.
I didn't kill him.
Then why are you paying the blackmailer?
I don't want a scandal, do I? We had a very humiliating public confrontation. He was deranged. He was lunatic. He didn't actually seem to like me very much. He had threatened to kill me in public.
Why would he want to kill you in public?
I think she meant he threatened in public to kill her.
Oh. Was that his final word on the matter?
Being killed is pretty final, wouldn't you say?
That's the thing I find so interesting about this movie is that it would be a queer touch point because of, like, the diva's leading lady alignment that so often has to serve as the surrogacy sort of representation or hook point for so many queer folks and particularly queer men that I know. But this one actually gives you Mr. Green saying, I'm a homosexual to a room full of people. And then watching that great moment where Tim Curry, just turns the pages of, the compromat that he has in his hand. Like, where's that at?
I have something to say. I'm not going to wait for Wadsworth here to unmask me. I work for the State Department, and I'm a homosexual. I feel no personal shame or guilt about this, but I must keep it a secret or I will lose my job on security grounds. Thank you.
Right. Well, and that's another interesting thing that comes up again in my buddy's essay is everybody has done something. They go, Madeline Kahn chopped off her husband's head, yada, yada, yada. Mr. Green didn't do anything. He just is a homosexual.
So true.
And they keep referring to it at the end when they're running, Tim Curry is giving this bravura performance of fast forwarding through everything that's happened in the movie in about 5 minutes.
Talk about also pansexual, implicit, presence in every way, Tim Curry.
Absolutely.
When he's like, my wife was committed suicide, it's like, sure she did. Sure she did, Corky St. Clair. Bonnie? Is that Bonnie?
Truly. And so, and they say, well, you cut off your husband's head and you did this and you were a war profiteer. And nobody ever says anything about Mr. Green. And so my friend's theory is that he has to have slept with Mr. Body.
Oh.
That's the only, how would you know?
Right.
Otherwise, it never comes up. But so, and it's beautiful that in this movie that's called Clue, which is about finding clues to lead you to some kind of conclusion, The conclusion in this case is like unfindable. Like there is no answer. And on a meta level, because of the nature of that, I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife. We can never know what the intention is. And if you look at that line, and I'm curious if this ever occurred to you, because to me, it always felt like he's protesting too much with that last line.
Right. Yeah. Like the amount of that's what you definitely do when you're straight is announce that you're going to go home and sleep with your wife. Maybe in front of all of the police officers and coworkers that ran into the room. Maybe you have to say that. But that's not generally how say married guys I know leave parties.
Right. Exactly. And so that to me was always okay, so in 2/3 of these endings, he's gay and nobody questions it. In the last ending, he's quote unquote straight, which by the way, he comes out, which very funny inversion there. But then he goes, okay, guys, I'm going to see my girlfriend who I have. She lives in Canada, but she's, I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife. An insane thing to say, although he does wear a wedding ring throughout the movie, which I only noticed watching it for this podcast.
Okay. Yeah, no, I've never spotted that.
So he's got something going on, but,
it's a very fellow travelers situation.
Yes. And so you're right, though. It's so, the costumes in this movie are just, and I think, again, it's kind of like you were saying, it's just much better than it has to be.
It is. And it, to what, I was reading an interview where you talked about writing for podcast narrative made you just sometimes, I'm just so ready to be able to write he looks in a mirror and thinks. But you can't do that because it's just an audio space. So you have to put texture and keep people compelled constantly with only audio hooks. And listen, they made it happen on radio for years. It's not it's novel or impossible. But watching this movie and seeing so many of the things, when Mr. Green, they re-enter the study at a certain point, and Mr. Green is just trying to find a place to sit. And that entire silent bit plays out where he cannot find a place to plop down because everyone keeps taking his chairs. I wanted to hear from you as somebody who works in narrative in multiple disciplines now. The experiencing Clue now as a grown person creating worlds and creating audio worlds only. Tell me about Clue from the standpoint of just density of content, density of comedy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that. And one of the things about Mr. Green is he's clumsy, which is another thing that the gay klutz, the gay
I'm a bit
sort
accident prone.
He's a bit accident prone. What is that supposed to be a euphemism for? But it never, I'm not familiar with that anywhere else in media, just he's a yutz and he's gay. I think the writing for audio thing is really interesting because it presents a lot of cool opportunities with Hot White Heist, namely, my whole career has been largely producing my own work. And so it's a lot of people talking in rooms, which I love. And a lot of stuff is people talking in rooms. Yeah. I can't write a train chase into my web series that cost $500 to make. I can't do it. And I can write that into a podcast because we don't have to shoot it. They call it shooting it when you record it, but we have an incredible audio designer, Jeremy S. Bloom, and an amazing Foley artist, Joanna Fang, and they were able to bring
MVPs of narrative podcast and radio narrative
really
world. Wow, the
knocking it out. And Joanna is every time she's doing all this stuff for Sony now and doing all these incredible movies, and every time I love something, the credits roll and I'm like, there she is. Wow. So it presents opportunities. It also presents challenges because, as I've said in that interview, you just long to have someone walk into a room silently and cry. And you can't do that in audio without having someone go, he walks into the room and he puts his head in his hands. And that's not, the narrating part of it has never been that interesting to me. And we found a fix for that, which is in Hot White Heist, the narrator is Tony Kushner.
What a fix.
When we need to call in a narrator occasionally. But, I think with something like Clue, I think the limitation / opportunity is the IP, right?
Yeah,
it's this idea today that you would sit down and you go, okay, so it's Clue. So what do people think of when they think of Clue and how are we going to play with that? I don't think you would come up with something as interesting as let's do 3 endings or let's make this a farce or whatever. And I think if you did, the Clue chuds on the internet, and I'm sure they exist.
I'm sure they do.
Because they all, whatever. Every fandom has its chuds.
Absolutely, yeah. That's not unique to anything.
Yeah, they would come out and they would say, well, but it shouldn't be a comedy because Clue is actually a very serious game about murder and how dare you and all this stuff. And so maybe they had the opportunity in 1985 when nobody cared, to say, let's do this outrageous thing. And maybe they were thinking the only way that anyone's going to go to see this movie based on a fucking board game is if we pack it with the most brilliant comedic actors alive. So I don't know how I would do that. I don't know if I would want to tackle something like that. Adaptation is really hard. I think the adaptation stuff that interests me the most is like stuff that's out of copyright that you can take a little more liberty with, I think anyone who takes on something like that, even if you don't think they did a great job, I think it's a really, really hard job. Not only from the perspective of fans coming at you, but executives coming in and going, we think that this IP means this, so you need to include this and you need to do that.
Yeah, we paid for it because we think it means this.
Exactly. And that's a really hard position to be in. And so I don't know. But it's liberating. When we started doing the podcast stuff, it was fun, but it was also very limiting. And now it's liberating to go back and especially to be looking at Hot White Heist again and saying, how do we make this visual? How do we take this story? What can we do now that we couldn't do before? Yeah. And it's a challenge, but it's really cool. That's a unique thing. To have written it as a podcast and then to be adapting it is a really neat process to be in the middle of.
Well, and like as Adam said, you guys, Hot White Heist is it's a gay heist movie, and we've heard the mention of sperm, and the story of it is a New York City queer voiced by Bowen Yang ends up folded into a commune / cult / organization called Clito.
The coalition of lesbians intent on taking over.
Naturally. And they have discovered that there is a bunker underneath the Space Needle in Seattle that houses the sperm of so many American presidents. And they are going to heist some of that sperm to sell it on the black market to fund their further, self-sustaining population off-grid needs. And then
you summarized that very effectively. Congratulations, because there's a lot in there.
There's a lot in there.
It's sperm bank heist and it's a queer heist. And, sort of the point of it is that Bowen's character recruits only queer people for the heist. And there's this element of it that...
They're the only people he knows and they're the only people he trusts.
Which, relatable.
Yeah,
and also,
exactly.
It turns out that he has this ability to sort of see, we're playing with all of these tropes, which I love to do, these heist tropes that everybody knows. And he's able to say... I see this thing that you're good at that maybe you didn't even know that you were good at, and I can make you feel useful. I can bring out something special in you to make this thing happen. And with the Clito, with the lesbians in the season 1, although they become more inclusive in season 2, it's a bit that they want to buy an island called Lesbos too. But it's also true that they need that island, they need that space because the world is hostile to them. Yeah. And because they need to feel that they have a place to call their own. And we get to really dive into that in season 2 and all of these questions about what do queer people owe each other? And is Caitlyn Jenner queer? Like what is queerness a political affiliation or is it just something that you do, So that it was kind of a way to sneak all of these themes that I had been obsessing over into a project using the tropes of a heist, which I do love. And I've watched so many of them just for research and for fun. And
well, that's the fun of horror and genre movies is that it's a recipe. And then you get to innovate with the recipe. Yes, it's formulaic. Yes, a lot of it is retreading. But then you get to put your personal stamp by taking all those things that are the most fun about the most fun genres and then do your own thing with it. You just have a framework.
Right. And I think, I can't put this intent on anyone who made Clue. Yeah. But what I can say is it is a really dumb farce that is based on a board game that snuck a whole bunch of queer subtext and in certain cases queer text into the brain of me and into I think a lot of other people. And that's magic. That's really cool, and that's a neat thing that you can do with your work. It doesn't always have to be the point of it, but sometimes sometimes these things happen, and it's magic when they do.
Well, and I think the ways in which this movie like connects with queer people, I think it provides such a great little case study in the richness of art that queer people take as their own and then turn what becomes tropes or becomes like little signatures of people and to make them like canonically queer things, make them canonically gay, and to be able to watch something and the histrionics of Eileen Brennan's character and be like, oh, well, that's for the gays right there. And to decide in a culture where at a time when things were not so much for us, you get to pick and choose whatever belongs to you because it's all up for grabs if none of it's up for grabs. And so to look at Madeline Kahn in that perfect, like everybody remembers Flames out the side of my face. Like we all know that one. But my favorite Madeline Kahn moment in this movie is A, he's not a very good illusionist, but B, when she just gets like turned to in the frantic heat of Tim Curry unveiling the mystery and someone just looks at her and she just goes, ah!
Yeah.
And that's queer. That's queer art right there.
The cop arrived next. We locked him in the library. We forgot the cupboard with the weapons was now unlocked. Then we split up again. And the murderer switched off the electricity. Oh, my God.
Not again. Turn on the lights.
Sorry. Didn't mean to frighten you. You're a bit late for that. Hate when he does that.
Absolutely. And I think part of it, and I think of Grease when I think of this too, because it's a period's view on another previous period. Right?
Yes,
and I think
a period
in that
piece
way,
of a period piece.
It is turned up to 11 in a funny way that it's commenting on itself, and that's camp. Right. And so we get to watch that. We get to comment on the thing that's commenting on something else. And there's a really special energy there that doesn't happen a lot. And like, I'm trying to think, Mad Men does it a little bit, which is my favorite TV show. You know, in later seasons when they start talking about the late 50s or the 60s at the beginning of the show, and you're seeing how they remembered things that you saw them go through 10 years earlier in their lives. Yeah, I mean, another thing about Clue, which I've showed it to a bunch of people, you know, and this sounds, when I say it, it sounds like someone saying this TV show gets really good in season 3, but I don't think it's quite that. Clue is a lot of fun to watch the first time, but I think only by the end when the payoff comes, because you're watching Clue and you're really trying to put the murder together.
Yeah,
right? You don't know. You don't know that there's going to be this thing where like all of the clues mean nothing.
Yeah.
It's like a reverse Rashomon. Like they're all equally stupid and they all didn't happen, you know?
Yeah,
But you know, you watch it once and it's fun, but I think the joy of the movie is watching it again.
Yeah. Oh,
and remembering,
absolutely. And
remembering every joke. Anticipating, you go, oh, right, that's, and then, she's eating monkey's brains there, you know, like all these little things, remembering what you thought when you thought that clue meant something. And I think also watching it this time, I realized, and this just plays into this idea of using tropes that people know, the script on a dialogue level, at least for the first 30 minutes, I don't know, you know, like, it's not a comedy. The comedy is happening because of the actors. You are watching a pretty straight-laced people showing up at the house, but you're watching it and you're watching Miss Scarlet kind of show her legs to the road to get picked up by Christopher Lloyd. And you're watching the dog and you're watching Tim Curry step in dog shit and all of that stuff. And then it's only later that people start to soup. You're watching them sip soup. Yeah, exactly. And I think another thing is the movie really doesn't wink at the audience very much, and that's so important. And we have talked about the kind of Whedonization of dialogue, the Marvelization of dialogue, that sort of thing. And I know for a little while there was this conversation about Jason Bateman and Ryan, what's-his-face, doing Ryan Reynolds doing a reboot of Clue. And you just think, well, Ryan Reynolds, his whole thing is winking at the audience. His whole thing is that he never disappears into a role, and that's kind of the point of him. And I think that it does not jibe with the vibe of Clue as we know it. And maybe they were going to invent it. I wish they wouldn't, but, you know, go with God. But like the part of the movie is that everybody in it is totally bought into it. And the emotions are very real. Martin Mull getting angry at people and being a buffoon is like very real. It's not, And it's very contained. It's kind of a little miracle of a movie in that way. It really only takes place in the house and running back and forth. And I can imagine them having a lot of fun shooting that. So I think when you contain something like that, maybe that's a limitation. But again, you can look at those limitations and go, how do we make this special? And it's just, right, it's the performances. I don't know what else to say. It's just incredible. And I think it's like the added element of what did they intend to communicate with Mr. Green is what makes it special to me. And there are a lot of different characters across media who, 6 Feet Under, like David Fisher, like all of these, who I can go, oh, that's a gay nerd too. But Mr. Green was early, and Mr. Green is unique. In terms of being not being ashamed, unlike David Fisher on 6 Feet Under, who grapples with his shame for the entire show. Mr. Green presents it very factually. He's also putting it together for the whole movie. He's figuring out all the clues. And then at the end, if you don't have that line about, I'm going to go home and sleep with my wife, and even if you do, if you believe that he's bullshitting, he solves the crime, he pulls out a gun, and he shoots Wadsworth, which, less guns on camera, whatever. I agree. I believe that. But like, he wins. He solves the murder, and he does
wins. He wins as a gay character.
Exactly.
He's a straight character for 2 seconds before the movie cuts out and the credits roll. Like, up to that point, he's a gay hero.
Yeah, and kind of in that way, again, unique. Like, I just can't think of a lot of other movies where the queer character just ends up being the one who solves the crime, gets away, does everything right, essentially. Yeah. So I love that about it, and I love that it's in this imperfect movie that nobody ever thought was going to succeed, that did really badly in theaters. And you listen to the actors talk about it in that oral history, and they're all like, yeah, we were all pretty bummed. Yeah. But now here we are, and people come up to me in the street and quote it all the time. And that's like a really crazy impact for something like that to have. So, 10 out of 10. And I think the only board game adaptation that I like, I'm trying to think. Could we give the Game of Thrones guys Candyland?
I hope so. I mean, Star Wars didn't happen, so I feel like there's another IP they can dive into.
There's something there, I don't know. And again, it's just like, it's a fun thought experiment to think, what would you do?
I would love to see the people who made Game of Thrones create a Lord Licorice for me. Yeah. He was always my favorite. He was always the most fabulous.
I mean, talk about queer icons. I mean, Lord Licorice.
Lord Licorice.
It's time for a quick break, but I'll be right back with Adam Goldman. Then I will have perhaps 2 quick things where I'm just going to recommend a few little movies that I think deserve more attention. So stick around at the end for some happy movie chat.
People say not to judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
Which is why here on Just the Zoo of Us, we judge them by so much more.
We rate animals out of 10 in the categories of effectiveness, ingenuity, and aesthetics, taking into consideration each animal's true strengths, like a pigeon's ability to tell a Monet from a Picasso, or a polar bear's ability to play basketball.
Guest experts like biologists, ecologists, and more join us to share their unique insight into the animal's world.
Listen with friends and family of all ages on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get podcasts.
I'm Dan McCoy.
I'm Stuart Wellington.
I'm Elliot Kalin.
And together we are The Flophouse, a long-running podcast on the Maximum Fun Network, where we watch a bad movie and then talk about it.
And because we're so long-running, maybe you haven't given us a chance. I get it, but you don't actually have to know anything about previous episodes to enjoy us, and I promise you that if you find our voices irritating, we grow endearing over time.
Perhaps you listened to one of our old episodes and decided that we were dumb and immature. Well, we've been doing this a while now. We have become smarter and more mature, and generally nicer to Dan.
But we are only human, so no promises.
Find The Flophouse on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back. I've been talking with writer Adam Goldman, whose narrative comedy podcast Hot White Heist stars Bowen Yang. Let's get back into it.
The idea of having fun with a marginalized person, non-normative person in the terms of like of these older works, it's hard to look at that as having fun in any way but at the expense of. Whereas when you have queer authorship, you can feel like the fun is an in-joke. And like one of the joys of like the queer up and down production that is Hot White Heist is being able to bring in queer trope, sort of queer, and stereotype is such a laden word, but like the things you would assume about queer people, and then hearing it, giving it voice and story and life in a way that's so built out that you can you can have fun with the known quantity aspects of trope without it feeling like it's somebody being dragged. Like one of my favorite moments in the first season is when Jack from the lesbian compound asks for a scrunchie in a situation where you aren't like, it's not like they're at a wedding and someone has a fucking bridesmaids box of like SOS materials. And Bowen's character Judy is like, I mean, yes, I do because I am that girl, but you shouldn't
he has a scrunchie, you know?
Yeah, you shouldn't expect me to in a situation. Like, what were to happen if I didn't? But, like, because I am that girl, like, to be able to play with the expectations of, like, you thought I did, and narrator, yes, he did. And then to watch, like, the way Mr. Green is played, like, when he says, like, I'm a homosexual, and then he gives this brave declaration, he's not guilty and he's not ashamed, and then he very demurely goes, thank you, and sits down in the most delicate way. And then later when all the men are lusting after the sexy maid Yvette, they're like, I'll go with you. And he just looks at her and, no, thank you. Like, he has no interest in going with the buxom maid walking around the house looking for a killer.
Colonel, are you willing to take that chance?
What choice have we?
None.
I suppose you're right.
Bon, d'accord. But it is dark upstairs and I am frightened of the dark. Will anyone go with me?
I will.
I will.
No, thank you.
And that has such a funny payoff, too, I think, when they're going up to the attic and they're so scrunched into the stairs. And, like, I think the bit, you know, nobody trusts each other at that point because they all think they might be a murderer. But I think there's this added bit of, like, Mr. Green's not enthusiastic about hanging out with Yvette. I think Yvette also does not like hanging out with Mr. Green because he's totally immune to her charms.
Absolutely.
And it turns out
she works in the brothel that Miss Scarlet runs. Like, she knows what tools she has to survive in a situation with men, and those don't work on her.
And those don't work on him. And later, when she drops the accent right before she gets killed, you know, you realize that everything that she's been doing is a put on, right? And so I think there's a really funny thing there. And in Hot White Heist, it's like the jokes. They're our jokes. It's really important for me to make them our jokes. And we had little writers' rooms for each season, largely with queer people. And, whatever. You have people like Seinfeld or whoever, it's like, you can't say anything. It's like, no, you can say anything. I don't want to say anything. Like, you can either be a piece of shit who, like, doesn't want to take anyone else's feelings or life experience into consideration, or you can be a human. Like, try being a mensch for 1 minute. And it's important to me making this show for everyone, but for this audience of people who I care about, of queer people, I don't want to tell a joke that would make someone feel bad, that would make them feel not included. I want to make this show for my people so that we feel like we are represented and we are in this thing together. And there's a philosophy in the second season of Hot White Heist that I put in the mouth of Ian McKellen's character.
Great choice.
Yeah. Where he says, the universe is queer. He says, like, in my opinion, the moon is queer. The sun is obviously a stunt queen. Like, trees are obviously queer. The only creatures in the universe who are straight people who insist on going, I'm straight. And so if you flip the polarity of your worldview, then it becomes very easy to just say, oh, no, this is for us. I'm making a thing for us. If it doesn't work for you, that's kind of your problem.
Yeah.
But I'm making the jokes that my people get. And I think my people are actually a lot more numerous than you might think if you're, for example, a studio executive, right? And so I believe that. I mean, I think that I had that thought one day walking through Madison Square Park, and it did flip a switch in my head of just feeling like, oh, you can imagine the world in a way that makes you feel included in it. And that has been important for me. And so it was important to slide that into the show. As ridiculous as it is, the show, not the idea, to fill it, put something under the hood is really important to me. It can be stupid as long as there's some engine underneath it that makes it go,
Well, and that's something that kind of comes back on this podcast a lot when I get to talk to queer creators is this kind of theory I've worked up of that queer people have a special kind of creative genius about them because from the very beginning we have to develop an incredible kind of inventiveness and imagination and creativity about the world in order to, especially for those of us millennial and older, who had fewer options. We get practice very early on inventing how we exist, where we should exist, what belongs to us. And I think that's a really interesting training for people who go on to become creatives because, in my opinion, it engenders a more accessible kind of limitlessness to creativity because we have to. Otherwise, we wouldn't exist anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the neat things about Clue is that not only does it serve way more than it needs to, but, again, as you were saying, without Mr. Green, it would still have all this stuff going on, but it has an awareness. Mm-hmm. And that makes it feel, again, I don't know, there's something very comforting to me about the presence of Mr. Green and the fact that the movie never makes fun of him. That's... It feels safe for that reason. Mm-hmm. And I can't, and I watched it the other night sort of with an eye out for this, I can't really think of a joke in there that hasn't aged well.
Right.
There's not, it feels like, well, no, I guess they couldn't have been thinking about it because you never know in 10 years what's going to be the thing that we were all wrong about, and we feel bad about, but there's not really anything in there that makes you go, oh, I really like Clue, but I wish they didn't make that joke about disabled people or something, it's clean, it's pure in that way. And I think that's maybe what I love about dumb and stupid humor is it comes from a very pure human place of people falling over, people farting because they ate baked beans in Blazing Saddles,
exactly.
All of this stuff, it's not at anyone's expense except for the dum-dums doing the dumb stuff. And I appreciate that. Because I'm a dum-dum doing dumb stuff. And so laugh at me, Well,
what is that, the 30 Rock joke about, the morons who deserve representation, too?
Yeah.
And, Denise Richards makes a cameo as herself, being idiots deserve to be listened to, too.
Yeah. Or as Tracy Jordan says, freaky deekies need love, too, Liz Lemon. Freaky deekies need love, too. And we do. We do. Give the freaky deekies our due, I would say.
Well, and as to what you were saying, as we come toward the end, if it has a beating heart, it's amazing what the way that it emphasizes the ability of dipshit comedy to land when the soul inside of it feels so real. And I wanted to thank you for the moment in season 1 of this when we learned that one of the lesbian separatists, which is a great gag just to think about, the lesbian separatists living very self-sufficiently. Well, of course they are. One of them, she was a dyke queen of New York City, and there's a moment where her bio is being delivered to Judy, and Jack, the one delivering the story, is and that was in 1985, and he immediately knows, and I felt I audibly went, oh, right. And it's the AIDS crisis, and she explained to us that she was in the bathhouses, she was on the pier, she was there caring for her friends and watching them die, and that quiet narrative of the AIDS crisis of the lesbians who were there taking care of their gay male friends while everyone was dying. This is in a heist podcast about stealing the sperm of dead presidents.
Yeah.
And I love that we get to have it all at the same time.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I really moves me that landed with you. And, that's a funny thing. And that's one of the freedoms of podcasts is that we didn't get a lot of notes. And that is to the benefit because, in that monologue, they never say, they say it was 1985. They never say, oh, you mean during the AIDS crisis? Nobody says that. And then we sort of gesture at that. Judy says, he says, that's not fair. You can't go all normal heart on me.
All normal heart on me.
And, so we get that. We understand that. I understand that for a certain proportion of the populace, you say she was in New York in the late 80s on the piers, and that doesn't mean anything to them. And that's kind of not my problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what are you going to do? Google it. We live in the age of information. That person's not listening to the show anyway, but if they were, I would just say, deal with it. So I'm happy that landed with you because those are the people, and this is not incredibly niche stuff. referring to like broad strokes queer history.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm saying something that happened in season 4 of American Horror Story. Like I'm talking about something that people should know. You should know that being in New York in the 80s as a gay man was like pretty rough in a lot of ways. So, you know, again, it doesn't come out of like, well, how do I design this to be that?
Yeah.
It's like the show is about putting together a team. And I fundamentally believe, you know, every day of your life is a little heist.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to wake up in the morning and think, I need to put together a team so that I can heist a little joy out of a hostile universe. And if you can do that, then you're doing all right. You can get away with it, you know, but it's not something you can do alone. And I think that's what's beautiful to me about queerness is it requires other people. It requires someone to bounce yourself off of. That's at least my experience. And I think the experience of a lot of people I love too.
I can't do better than that. Like I can't ask you a closing question that will produce a better end result than that. And that is, Adam, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Just wish this show was 2 hours long because I'm having the best time.
Well, when they reboot Clue, I will come back and I will be guns blazing and we can talk about it then.
Thank you to Adam Goldman. It was so great to catch up. And on what better occasion than to answer part of the question of what is it that we talk about when we talk about Clue? As he mentioned, you can listen to season 1 of Hot White Heist wherever you get your podcasts, but season 2 is exclusively on Audible. So go get that tease and then go seal the deal with season 2. And now that one quick thing before I go, we're just like a few little movies that I wanted to plug, little queer gems. One that I had seen years ago for the first time, and it just, every once in a while, I think about it since then. It's this little post-apocalyptic movie, Riot Girls. It is not the show The Society on Netflix, despite what this will sound like, but it is about a future in which all parents have disappeared, and it is just a land of children. And when I say children, I mean like teens. And it's fun. It's fun post-apocalypse. It's action-oriented. There are scenes that are animated like a comic strip. And I'm recommending it to you because it's also kind of gay. And I, want to plug queer art where I can. This one, I don't think anybody else has ever recommended it to me, but I remember when I saw it just being like, this is so delightful. This is so charming. It's from director Jovanka Vukovic. And I want you to see it. I want you to see it. And then I also want you to give a shot to, Jane Schoenbrunn is lighting up our lives at the moment with I Saw the TV Glow. But you can support more trans filmmakers out there. First of all, by seeing the movie T-Blockers. This is not an A24 film. It is bootstrappy. It is independent, but it supposes, what if red pilling was like a contagion and like men's rights, far right, militant freak show people were actually like zombies turning men into other red pill zombies. And a bunch of queers fighting back against that with a trans protagonist. And of course, we love to see it. It's Australian. Australia has a wonderful tradition of Mad Men and horror cinema, one of my absolute favorite in the world. So check it out. That's just 2 little movies you can go out there and support because we should be finding little buried treasures. So Riot Girls and T-Blockers. Go give them a go. And that is our show. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FeelingSeenPod or send us an email at feelingseen@MaximumFun.org. If you want to follow me, I'm JorCrew on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Ethan. The show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows, supported
directly
by you.